All right, I hope you guys are enjoying. Oops, hope I didn't touch anything. So the first thing, I guess I'll introduce myself first. Hi, my name's Glenna Gannon. I am the board chair for the Alaska Food Policy Council. I'm really happy to be here and see all of these amazing faces and people who are doing really great work throughout our state and beyond. I just came from another science-based conference in Colorado earlier this week, and I will say this is a whole lot better. My cup is feeling a lot fuller, and I'm feeling a lot more hopeful. So thanks to all of you for the work that you do. This is great to be with you. I'd like to start out by thanking and recognizing our sponsors. Safeway paid for our lunch today, so thanks so much, Safeway. Let's give it up for them. Yeah, good food. All right, and then other sponsors we'd like to recognize today: the State of Alaska Department of Health, Northwest Transition to Organic Partnership Program, the Hawaii Good Food Alliance, and the Islands Remote Areas Regional Food Business Center, Maison, a Jewish response to hunger, the Alaska Commercial Company, or ASD Stores, as many of us know them, Alaska Division of Agriculture, and NANA Management Services. Let's give a quick round of applause for all of our great sponsors. Thanks. All right, so before we jump in, another note from one of our primary advocacy and policy sponsors, Maison, a Jewish response to hunger. We'd like to just share a little bit about their organization. They are a national nonprofit that works to end hunger among people of all faiths and backgrounds in the United States and Israel. Rooted in Jewish values and inspired by the idea of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, Maison combines education, advocacy, and strategic grant making to address the structural causes of hunger and food insecurity, not just the symptoms. Rather than focusing on direct food aid, Maison emphasizes policy change and systemic reform. The organization advocates for strong federal nutrition programs, equitable access to food assistance for underserved populations, including military families, Native Americans, Native Alaskans, LGBTQ+, seniors, and rural communities, and is a safety net that ensures dignity for all who need help. With Maison's generous grant making, AFPC has been able to hire its very first advocacy and policy director, and provide much needed capacity to help support the fight against hunger across all sectors of Alaska's food system. Please enjoy a brief message from Maison.
This year's Alaska Food Festival. The National Anti-Hunger Organization is partners in Alaska. Maison staff has had the privilege of presenting and attending this conference in the past. So we want to begin by offering our congratulations to the Alaska Food Policy Council for all of our work involved in the conference. Now I understand that this year, for the first time, the conference is using the road system. And while most of Alaska's villages and territories and municipalities are connected to the road system, the fact that this conference is sold out is proof positive that you are connected by a deep commitment to building local, resilient, and abundant food systems that can produce and provide food for all. For Maison, which is marking its 40th anniversary this year, that commitment means advocating for effective food policies, protecting Alaska Native subsistence rights, promoting and strengthening the role and reach of food programs like WIC, school meals, and SNAP, and mobilizing communities and policymakers to act on behalf of those who struggle with food knowledge. Now, as I speak, spring is unfolding. And although it's a time of uncertainty and change, it's also a time for renewal and possibility. So I hope you will use your time together to gather inspiration, information, and connections that will help you to move forward with purpose as you continue the hard work of building the food system, and food security for Alaska well into the future. Thank you for the opportunity to offer my well wishes, and have a great conference.
Thank you again, Maison. All right, so now I'd like to just take a moment to share some perspectives on AFPC, where we've been and where we're going. And if any of you are interested in knowing more about AFPC, hopefully you already know a lot, but you can always go to our website. I highly recommend, just to get a landscape view of what our organization does and the work that we've done from year to year. Check out our annual reports. And with that, and in response to Maison's generous funding, I would like to just share that over the past year, Alaska Food Policy Council has really had some pivotal growth, and we have been so excited to finally be hiring staff. So you may have already heard this announced earlier this week or this weekend, but really this is a huge deal for us. For the longest time, we have been a volunteer-run board, and we have only in the last year had a executive director, so a staff of one. And I just want to let that settle in for a moment, because think about how many AFPC food festivals and conferences you've been to, the work that you've heard about, hopefully you've heard about. That isn't a testament to the really dedicated and passionate people who work in Alaska's food system and one really bad AD. Yeah. All right, so this development really does mark a natural progression from our origins as that volunteer-based board and governance model, and has moved us into a new era of, as a board, into this era of strategic oversight. Now that we have dedicated staff handling our day-to-day operations, board members have been able to transition from more of our hands-on responsibilities for organizational responsibility into setting long-term strategic goals and ensuring alignment with AFPC's mission. Again, on our website, you can find a lot of information about all of the work that we did last year to set our strategic priorities and read more about our goals and values. This shift reflects a common trajectory among maturing boards such as ours, and the initial volunteer approach, where our board members managed the immediate tasks, and now we are evolving and prioritizing these areas and putting them into action with dedicated staff. And I would like to just take a second and give all of those staff a round of a hand, because you wouldn't be here without them. Yeah. Yeah. This evolution over the past year demonstrates AFPC's commitment to growth and resilience, not only within our own organization, but within the state of Alaska's food system. And with collaboration between the board and the staff, AFPC is now more than ever thriving, and we are prepared to tackle the complexities of Alaska's food system and the needs of all Alaskans. So yay, AFPC, and thanks everyone. Woo. All right, so with that, I would like to, introduce are we still on? Okay, I would like to introduce our keynote for the post-lunch period. I'm very honored to get on the right page. I'm very honored to introduce Dune Lankard. He is Eyak Athabascan native from Eagle Clan of the Copper River Delta and Prince William Sound regions of Alaska. Born into a commercial fishing family, his life education as a subsistence and commercial fisherman began at age 5. After graduating from high school, he fished full-time in the ocean for all 5 species of wild salmon, Pacific cod, herring, tanner and Dungeness crab, halibut, and earned a living as a fisheries and processing consultant in his off-season. In the wake of the March 24, 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill that washed up on the pristine shores of his beloved homelands, Dune earned his Eyak name, Jamatsaki, all right, which means little bird that screams really loud and won't shut up. Yeah. As he has stepped down from fishing daily to become full-time passionate community member and activist and social change artist, he has stepped down to do those amazing things. From that day on, he has been fighting in courts and on the land to preserve, protect, and restore native and fishing culture and wild salmon habitat. Along with the Native Conservancy, Dune founded and led the Eyak Preservation Council. The EPC is now known as the Cultural Defense Fund, amongst other entities. After 35 years of land-back work in the Gulf of Alaska that led to the preservation of 1 million acres of wild salmon habitat, Dune now works on building an Indigenous-led community-based ocean farming, ocean back model to help heal and restore the ocean. While developing kelp farms in Alaska, he is helping to build portable and affordable community kelp seed nurseries and community cold storage to help native ocean farmers and fishermen improve their relationships with their wild food sources. Please join me in welcoming Dune Lankard. Chametsuki. You want to hold this or how?
Just go ahead. Slide around there. Goodies. So, thank you. And then the introduction kind of said it all, so I'm done. um, to begin, I have to think about the Exxon Valdez oil spill. The 36th dark anniversary was on March 24th. And to me, that was the day that the ocean died and something inside of me came to life. And I realized that no one was coming. Like, you know, I thought the president was gonna make an announcement. I thought the Alaska delegation would step up and, you know, and demand accountability and responsibility. But it never happened. Nobody came. And I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for somebody to step up and say, you know, let's take on the powers that be. And there was a handful of activists in the Cordova area, dear buddies of mine, Rick Steiner and Ricky Ott and David Grimes, and a number of other folks. But what I realized is a lot of people just wanted to become spillionaires. And they wanted to figure out how they were going to cash in. And I remember a dear fishing buddy of mine said, I just got a new boat out of the deal. I can't wait till the next spill. And I said, but this changes everything. Just this changes who we are. Things are not going to be the same in our lifetime. And 36 years later, there's still dead zones in Prince William Sound. There's still areas that the salmon and the birds and the wildlife just won't go to. And then I found myself having to look at everything differently. I looked at the ocean differently. I looked at the people differently. I looked at the fishing community differently. And I realized I had to start 13 different nonprofits to take on the powers that be, because I wish one entity could have done it all. It would have made my life easier. But it is what it is. And the reason I'm here in front of you right now today is because of that spill. And had the spill not happened, I wouldn't have the relationships that I have today. I would be out there fishing and banging boats and fighting over fish and trying to pay my bills. But as I look around this room, I see a lot of buddies from different walks of life and different places that, you know, I admire, and all of you give me strength. You know, I believe that Together, collectively, we're stronger, we're wiser. I think good will prevail over evil. And after these elections, after the federal freezes and shutdowns, I'm a different person again. So at different points of our life, we have things that happen to us, whether they're personal or they're professional. But we have to evolve. We have to think differently. We have to act differently. We have to demand differently if we're going to create change. We just can't hope for it. We just can't hope for the best and let someone else get it done. Because whether you like it or not, we're the best we got. And I'm in for the long haul. So I grew up fishing with my family in the Copper River Delta in Prince William Sound. We were one of the last native fishing families. And we always liked to compete with the bigs, even though we didn't have the boat or, the crew or the equipment, but we always were really competitive. And I remember when I saw the first sailboat, modern day sailboat, and modern day kayaks enter Prince William Sound. I knew that we had been discovered, and I knew that it was the beginning of the end. And because we knew that more people were going to come because of its beauty and its bounty. And just the abundance alone. I mean, when you think about it, like even Kodiak here, we seen those numbers. Our community, your community, a number of other were in the top 20 for years, for decades. And we dropped out of it right after that Exxon Valdez oil spill. We are no longer in the top 20. But the only thing that kept us in there is hatchery fish, which, has its place. It definitely feeds people, but it's not wild fish. And so, part of my message is that, we have to protect our wild salmon spawning habitat so salmon have a home to come back to. And I have a couple of disclaimers to make. I blew out my calf muscle 2 days before I got here. So I haven't been able to attend the conference for the last couple of days. I've been having to kind of rest and ice my leg. And then I found out that my crew got me on a 7 o'clock flight in the morning. I'm not a morning person unless I'm fishing. So tomorrow's going to be an opener for me. And I wish I could say that, I hurt my calf trying to dunk a basketball or slam a ping pong ball, but I did it trying to keep up with my girlfriend. And she was walking at 3.4 and I was walking at 3.2, and I decided to give a little boost of speed, and I was like, oh my God. So I spent my life chasing salmon and herring around. I would start out in, I guess I have the clicker, right? Okay. Okay, hang on here. They don't give me this all at once often. Okay, so I grew up chasing herring. I'd start out in Prince William Sound. I'd go over to Togiak. I'd go down to or up to Good News Bay and Cape Romanzoff, and then I'd end up in Norton Sound. And the goal was to make 50 grand and then race back down to the Copper River Delta and get ready for gill netting and seining. And, it was a life that I thought would last forever. I took it for granted. I thought that I would pass this on to my children, my little Ananda. And that wasn't the case. But being a fisherman, I'm an eternal optimist. And you have to be if you're a fisherman. You can't tell your crew the fish aren't coming. The next set will always be better. The next day will always be better. The next week, the next year will always be better. Otherwise, you better not be a fisherman. So down in the bottom, okay, there's a button here. Right here, that's Eyak land. And Dr. Michael Krauss, when he made this language map of the traditional lands of the native people speaking different language in Alaska, he erred on this map. Our land actually goes all the way down to Yakutat. And the Eyaks originally of Athabascan descent came out of the interior of Alaska and came down to the coast 3,500 years ago. And we figured we'd camp out in Cordova till it quit raining. And we find ourselves still there. So Prince William Sound is 5.5 million acres. The Copper River Delta is a 17 million acre watershed. They're two magnificent watersheds that are basically divided between the Copper River and the town of Cordova. And Cordova at one time used to be called Eyak. And Eyak means throat of the lake. And so they called us the throat of the lake people because we would build our subsistence camps right there at the throat of the lake because the freshest fish coming up into the rivers would go by us before they got into the lake and then turn a different color and a different texture, a different flavor. And some of the elders loved that, but I never did much. But I liked catching the salmon, so I can understand why they put their subsistence cabins there. And this is what the 3 million acres of the lower Copper River watershed looks like. It's stunning. It's all wetlands, and it's absolutely wild. And so the Eyaks made canoes, traditional canoes, and canoes are one of the most dangerous vessels on the planet. And the 3 times when I first started out as an activist, people wanted to do films of me in a canoe. And I reluctantly did it. So I'm lucky I'm even here today. And so I did things with that canoe I don't think no one should ever do. But the 3 films got made and it looked like I was smiling, but I was actually terrified. But for some reason, they wanted an Indian in a canoe. So I love this picture because of, you can see the spots on the pinks and the same as like the kings and the silvers. But I think that the pinks, the humpies, are one of the most underrated fish in the sea because they have some of the most omega-3s. And they feed a lot of different critters like the herring. You know, prior to the Exxon Valdez oil spill, we had 200,000 ton of herring that would return to Prince William Sound annually. And after the spill, the herring were no longer spawning and they had lacerations and lesions underneath their scale patterns. So they were actually bleeding. And so they plummeted. They went from 200,000 ton to only 4,000 ton. And so now the herring decided, because they're smarter than us, they decided to spawn on the Copper River Delta where there was no oil. And so now they're recovering and they're back up to 20,000 returning ton. The bad news is that ADF&G feels that that's healthy enough to warrant a commercial fishery again and pounding. I don't think so. I think we're still a ways away. And here's the thing. The 27 most heavily impacted species from the spill would recover if the herring recover. The people would recover if the herring recover because herring was 50% of our annual income. And so for us to lose all that and then put all that pressure on the fisheries, that's why we have 5 of the largest hatcheries in the world right now. Because fishing was the only thing that kept our community alive. So here's Fisherman Dune. This is one of my gill netters on course that's now off course. I love this boat, the Rock On. That thing was actually terrifying because the boat went so fast. And a lot of times when I get in breakers and fishing in there, sometimes you're happy when you can go that fast and get away from danger, but you can also get yourself in different situations. And I've always run jet boats. A lot of people like lower units. And the thing about lower units is the prop pushes and pulls and you have true power. So if you have 300 horse at the engine, you have 300 horse at the prop. Where a jet, you lose 30% at the impeller. So if you have 300 horse, you only have 210 at the jet. But you can fly in shallow water, which the entire Copper River Delta is shallow. So here's a graphic of the spill zone, which is 1,500 miles that was impacted by that oil spill. And it, to this day, as I said, is still impacting areas and fisheries and resources that will probably take another 36 years to recover. And this is what we grew up with right there after 1989. And to see the orcas, there was 36 resident orcas that lived in Prince William Sound. There's probably only 5 of those alive today because they have one partner for life. And so they're getting older and they're on their last legs. And 3 out of the 6, one of them is named Steiner, another one the Grimes, and another one Lankard, for our work to preserve as much habitat as we possibly could. But we were a guinea pig, like all the communities in the spill zone. They used the hot wash and killed everything in the intertidal zone. They used bioremediation. They used caught the oil on fire in some places. We were a guinea pig, and it was a failed experiment because the cleanup did as much or more damage than the oil spill itself. The correct it was certainly more damaging because it didn't correct shit. What it did was it hurt and killed the environment. That's like pouring carburetor fluid into the ocean and hope that it dissipates the oil. And probably the biggest and most successful response out of the $2 billion that was spent was when the fishermen used 5-gallon buckets to dip the oil out of the water, or they were able to use rags that people sent us from around the world. People sent us, just boxes and boxes of T-shirts and whatever we could. And so we'd use that to wipe up the rocks, and that probably picked up more oil than any of their skimmers, any of their operations. And the number one response to oil spills today, 36 years later, is dispersants. Get it out of the public eye, sink it into the water column, less damage, less media. So the Eyaks, we decided to have our first Eyak potlatch, and over 100 years. And our chief, Marie Smith-Jones, is there in the middle of me and my sister Pamela. And so, we decided to make some regalia, and I wanted the white and black with the red diamonds, because the diamonds means coming together in Eyak. Red and black means our war colors. So, yeah. Because we knew that we were going to be in a battle for the rest of our lives. So this is my sister Pamela. Most of, her friends, they say, "Oh, you're Pam's younger brother, Dune." I said, "I am." And Pam is quite famous for her smoked salmon, and she is one of my best buddies. She's a year and a half older than me, and she lets me know that all the time. And she's a dear friend. And when the native corporations decided to clear cut 1 million acres in the parallel path of the Exxon Valdez right after the oil spill, the only friend I had when I took on the battles with the Native corporations was my sister Pamela. And she said, Dune, no matter what happens, the salmon will always be ours. We will always have a relationship with them, and that relationship won't change. Maybe the number or the size or the returning salmon will, but we'll always be the Copper River salmon people. And so these were days of abundance. Now if you can catch that money, that would be a big deal. And they're much smaller. A lot of Jack Kings, a lot of small kings now. And but it's our food security and our food sovereignty. And what I want to say about that is that a dear friend of mine, Elizabeth Hoover, wrote this article after hearing Winona LaDuke speak, and Winona said something to the effect of, how can you call yourself sovereign if you can't feed yourself? And to me, that resonated loudly because I was like, okay, well, how are we going to feed ourselves going forward? And out there in the world, and I'm sure that a lot of you have seen this and have friends and family and people that have been impacted by the fires and the flooding, the world is on fire. Things are changing. What's happening is unreal. And the migrations of the planet is happening. There's wars. There's going to be huge wars over migration. It's happening in Ukraine and Russia. It's about soil. It's about habitat. It's about how you're going to feed your people. And so that's why I decided to, after the water heated up in 2019, well, prior to that, in 2017, we only harvested 45,000 sockeyes on the Copper River, sockeye salmon. The next year, we only harvested 90,000 sockeyes. This is a run where we'd catch 1 million to 2 million a year. And then all of a sudden, we have these extremely low numbers. Then in 2019, the ocean heats up for 76 degrees for 3 weeks, down to 20 feet below the surface, and it changes everything. And I sat down with my family and friends and said, this is not the end. This is not how it ends. This is how it begins. This is how we're going to have to rise up and take on the powers that be again. But we're going to have to learn how to grow things from the land and the sea. So food focus is going to be on the horizon for all of us here real soon. And, and I know that as much as I love fishing and chasing them around, and I don't have a green thumb. For some reason, I can't grow anything on the land. But I found out I can grow things in the water because I don't have to do anything. But you don't have to feed it. You don't have to water it. You don't have to fertilize it. You don't have to chase it around. And so we started looking at different ways that we could create traditional food sources or, kind of revive our subsistence culture. Because after COVID broke out, a lot of the elders weren't getting their traditional foods. And so we started a food security program, and now we're harvesting as many as 17 different species of traditional foods that we have grown up on. And so we've been sharing those with our elders and then doing all the different subsistence practices. And now we're into kelp farming and mariculture. So kelp can help. And the thing about kelp too is that it's like the hemp of the sea. It's like this ridiculous plant, this organism that can grow 18 to 24 inches a day under ideal conditions. What we found was that in the first year we grew ribbon, sugar, and bull kelp. And we found that the sugar was happier than heck, and the ribbon didn't know what to think. The bull kelp was a challenge, but I liked all the tiny bulbs, for some reason, some people don't. But our learning curve with ocean farming is straight up. I think it's going to be an experiment every single year, every single time, no matter what you do. And our native conservancy, we realized that there were a number of barriers to entry that were going to prevent indigenous peoples to be able to get into this industry. And so we wanted to figure out how to address some of those barriers through foundation support to help de-risk this industry that could be a new ocean industry that has restorative and regenerative properties. And there's April and I. We were back east with Brent Smith at Greenwave. And, when I started realizing that indigenous peoples used to navigate in the ocean along kelp highways. And then when we started a Kelp Now tour, and it got cut short because of COVID, but we had a lot of Zoom calls, and I'm tired of Zoom calls, but I'm still doing them. And I realized that there's all this rich heritage and culture around sea vegetables and kelp and seaweed and mariculture species. But one thing that we're going to have to do is figure out how to grow more mariculture species so we have a diversified income strategy. Because sitting around waiting for kelp to grow and get paid to watch kelp grow, you better start another income. So I'm sure everyone knows what kelp is in mariculture. But when we started meeting with the different communities, indigenous communities, they wanted to get into kelp and mariculture for 3 reasons in this order. 1, so they could help heal and restore the ocean, number 1. Number 2, to feed their people a traditional food source that they've enjoyed for thousands of years. And 3, to build a regenerative economy that they could be part of and proud of. And so, I feel like the 5 to 7, 9 different immersion training programs that we have, we kind of changed the hands-on train the trainer model to an immersion course where we go out into the village, get out into the wild, get out on the ocean with different communities, and then also bring them to our homelands and show them our operation and what we do. And they can figure out what they don't want to do. And, and the thing about all these tests and all these pilot programs is there are no mistakes. Their failures are success because you learn from them or you don't. So I put together a new motto, I guess you'd call it, land back plus ocean back equals people back. Because a lot of different foundations, wanted, well, how do you explain what you do? Because what you do is fairly complex with your land back work and your ocean back, and what is your goal? And I said, well, to get our people back, because I think as things digress and get worse, because things are not going to get better before they get worse, people are going to be coming back home. And so if we can build regenerative economies that are good paying jobs to be citizen scientists and actually grow food and feed our people and sell our excess, then, we're going to be able to bring our people back. And, we found that a lot of the new ocean farmers are women. And so I think the youth and the men will follow. So these are a few of the regions that we work in. And I've met with all 12 regional corporations a couple of times, with Koniag, Chugach, and Sealaska, about once a quarter. And they basically have said, you help de-risk this industry, then we'll invest heavily in our people. This is a good thing. But it's also a bad thing because we got to do all the work. But if we do it together, if we figure out how to help each other and learn from those successes and figure out, what can grow the best where, grow that and figure out, how we can meet these different markets. Because one of the last things that we're going to want to do is compete against each other for the same marketplace, and especially with the unknowns in the ocean, because the ocean's going to get warmer and things are going to be harder. And it's already hard enough trying to figure out how to do what we're doing already. And so I think that, if we're all networking more closely together, we'll be able to figure out how to grow the best products where and drive up that price point with our quality and our ability to work together and sell direct. So this is kind of like our circular ocean economy in some of the different things that we're doing to create creative financing around this. And again, I'm just a fisherman, and now I'm a kelper, and now I have to be an economist, and I have to figure out finances and all these different things. So I said, the hell with that. I'm just going to hire the team to actually do this work to pull it off, because I really want to be out there on the water fishing or kelping. There's a lot of skills that we've had to bring together. Like one of the first things is you have to figure out how to write your business plan. You got to figure out how to do your landscape analysis. You got to figure out where you're going to get your insurance and your workman's comp, and how does this all work? And so I think that, eventually there needs to be like a Kelp Alliance, a 501c4, that all they do is focus on laws and policy and regulation and legislation. We need cooperatives to figure out how to offset the high cost of getting into this business, and also figure out how we're going to process, how we're going to buy all the anchors, lines, and buoys, figure out how we can do the processing, value adding, dehydration, marketing, ourselves, and figure out how to drive those costs down. And so I think, and a lot of fishermen don't like cooperatives, so we can call them collectives. So in going out into the different villages, and even like being here in Kodiak, I think what we need to figure out is how to organize well enough so we can do like a deep dive in 4 or 5 key areas in Alaska that has the most potential, and then figure out the kelp and the species and the mariculture species and what can grow the best where, and then figure out how to fund that and implement these programs to capitalize on the potential, because it's not going to be the same everywhere, and especially with the changes happening in the ocean so quickly. And and I want to make a cry out for wild, old growth kelp forests, that we need them and we should be protecting them, because that's the mother seed that we need for this new industry. Without that mother seed, this industry doesn't take off. So if we can figure out how to have moderation in harvesting of wild kelp forests, that would be a good thing, especially with what's happening with wild kelp forests around the world. One of the biggest challenges is the workforce development, and also having to pay others, like with boats or diving equipment, and to get into this industry and really figure out how to reduce those overhead costs, we have to figure out how to develop that workforce. And so one of our immersion training programs is diver certification. And we've held 3 or 4 of these classes, and we've got a lot of new native divers out there. We're trying to figure out, how to develop this workforce. So it's not just for the mariculture industry, but it's actually for, helping themselves in their personal lives as well, because it creates new job opportunities. And so we just graduated 6 more kelpers from Cake divers from Cake in Metlakatla. This is Marina making one of our favorite kelp cakes. And my sister Pamela found a recipe from the Cordova crimes from 1908. And what it was this article where this writer had seen the ship land in Cordova from the Bering River. And there was a big push to open up the Bering River coal fields and develop this beyond belief by the Guggenheims and JP Morgan, because they wanted to power their locomotives and go 150 miles up the Copper River to Kennecott to take the copper ore back to the terminal in Cordova and off to America. And so he saw these 2 Native women jump off the vessel, and they were skipping down the road, and it looked like 2 bricks of coal underneath their arm from the coveted Bering River coal field. And so he goes, oh my God, there's a story there. Because down in Catella, they were burning effigies of Teddy Roosevelt, the president, and Gifford Pinchot, the first head of the Forest Service. And they were actually having Boston tea parties in Cordova, taking foreign coal and dumping it overboard, demanding the opening of the Bering River coal field on the Eastern Delta. And so the writer caught up to these 2 Native women. And when he caught up to them, he realized they were bricks of kelp, not coal. And he's like, what the heck? And so what the Eyaks would do is they would cold press kelp. They would have like layers of kelp and berries and kelp and hooligan and kelp, and they would cold press it. And so it had the omegas, it had the vitamins, it had the flavor. It kept you alive. I mean, a lot of the early expeditions of folks, whoever they were, that came to visit Alaska and discover Alaska would get lost, they'd run aground, and they wouldn't know how to hunt and fish. And at low water, they would eat the kelp, and it kept them alive. And so it was really nice to find that recipe after 100 years. And so we just started throwing in spotted shrimp and smoked salmon bits and other things to liven her up. But these are kelp sliders. And I think they'll make this presentation available to you, so you'll be able to have one of the recipes. But this is our vessel, the Noctiluca. It's a 40-foot by 14-foot wide bow picker that I bought out of Washington. That's kind of like our kelp operation boat. We do all our diver certification. We do a lot of our immersion training programs. And it's nice to have that big crane to be able to lift our anchors, lines, and buoys and totes and stuff. And so we do everything from, having media to it's a tender, kind of, it's a catch-all. But a couple of things we're working on is developing a native sea trust, and that's to help Indigenous peoples get permits in their hands because they cost so much and take so long to get. A Native Kelp Cooperative, a Native Kelp Alliance, Kelp Highway Network. And I decided to also start working with the villages to formulate some sort of indigenous mariculture plan. And I'll tell you what, if the Indians start organizing, everyone's going to organize. It's going to happen because we really have to have a plan going forward. We need a plan for America. We need a plan for Alaska. We need a plan for the world. And when you think about it, if you take aquaculture and mariculture and put them together, 50% of the weight from all of those species that are being grown and farmed in the water around the world, 50% is kelp. And 97% of the kelp that is grown around the world is grown in 5 Asian leading countries. 97% of the kelp that is eaten in the world is eaten by those same 5 Asian countries. So there's lots of room for expansion for us. And we want to go after some of their markets too, because they want our colder waters. And that's why so many kelp corporations are out there in the water right now. And how am I doing on time? Okay. I was really shocked they gave me a whole hour with you. But I'll leave some time for any questions or thoughts. So, I feel like there's a blue wave that is going through the ocean around the planet. And some people call it the blue economy. And I feel like if we figured out how to set our differences aside and we directed that energy, that time, money, or love, whatever direction that we need to in Alaska, that we're going to ride on top of this wave rather than this wave crashing down on us. We're going to be able to take advantage of the knowledge and the indigenous knowledge, the traditional ways, traditional means, customary and traditional practices. I think that, a dear friend of mine, Michael Bezanson, I was talking to him one day, and Michael created the organic food program for Whole Foods USA. And he said, Dune, in these times, if it's not regenerative, just don't do it. And I thought about that. I said, you're right, Michael, because we really have an opportunity to think and act differently and be different. And we really don't have a choice. It really comes down to us and how we're going to do this and pull this off. So this is my daughter, Ananda. She's 14 now. And I'd been doing climate change activism for 25, 30 years. And Ananda filed her first lawsuit when she was 1 on climate change. And then she filed her second one when she was 7, one against the state and the other against the feds. And when she was 1, she kept, in the hearing, she kept taking her sippy cup and banging it against the mic because it'd make this reverberating sound in the courtroom. And she loved that. And after like the 3rd time, the judge said, Mr. Lankard, I'm going to get you for contempt of court if you cannot control your daughter. Or he said, your little one. And I said, Your Honor, she's clearly not happy with what's happening with the climate. And so right at that time, my sister Deb had walked in and I was able to hand her off. But then when Ananda turned 7 and we were before the Alaska Supreme Court, I said, honey, okay, there is a chance that the justices could ask you why you're here. And I said, so you have to come up with just a simple, short answer. And she goes, my dogs need snow. I said, honey, Daddy's been doing this for 30 years and you just summed it up in 4 words. I said, what the heck? So my little Ananda is a dog racer. She has 17 sled dogs. And I told her, I said, do you have aspirations of going pro? She goes, no, I'm just going to keep winning though. And I said, well, okay, if you go pro, then they'll support you and they will fund you and Daddy doesn't have to. And she goes, well, how would I do that? I said, put green race, a race to be green on the side of your sled and it'll change everything for Daddy, honey. And she's also a basketball star and a volleyball star. She loves track and field. She's a downhill skier in the diamond runs, which I do not like. And she races horses and does barrel racing, along with being an artist and a straight A student and a dog racer. And I said, honey, your schedule is busier than Daddy's. But I do what I do for her and for the youth and for the future. And, and sometimes people, they come up to me and they go, we just can't believe what you're doing. And you just seem to be rising and going for it. And I said, it appears I'm on the uphill rise, but I'm actually on the downhill slide. And what I want to do is help pass on some of these opportunities and also some of this wisdom that allows the youth to grok and grasp what the mantle that they're going to be taking up here real soon, because they're our best bet. And this is why I did the two lawsuits with Ananda, because the children are the ones who are going to inherit the bad decision debt and the mess that we have left them in. And so I felt like, let's just do everything we possibly can to set them up for success. And one of the last stories that I want to share with you is that with our Eyak language, in 2008, we lost our last full blood. We lost Marie, who I showed that picture of. And in 2010, I was in San Francisco and I'm driving down the road with a friend and her car, and over KPFA radio, it comes out, it says, the last full-blooded Eyak passed away 2 years ago. Therefore, the Eyak language is dead. And I punched her dash. And she goes, what are you doing? I said, this is your car, and I'm sorry. And she said, you okay? And I said, no, I'm not. I said, they're saying our language is dead. And so I raised $1 million and saved it. And we have 20 key learner speakers. We're learning our language. And the thing about language is not just words, but it's meaning. It's about knowledge. It's about understanding. It's about knowing who you are and where have you been and where you're at now. And you have a better chance of, if you know this information, on how we're going to get to where we need to go now. And, I'm absolutely honored to have been invited here. And, Robbie has always, been my buddy, and your organization has always been really nice and sweet to me. And I appreciate that. And you've been really patient with me over the years. But I just feel like, we have to be bold and louder than everything else. Yet as long as we remain a voice of reason, people will listen. We'll be able to make that change that really needs to happen. And there's no reason, even though things are going to get harder and we're going to have less, there's no reason we can't have fun and feed our people, take care of each other, take care of our families, because I'm in it to win it. Are you? Thank you. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer it.
Are there any questions for Dune? And if there are, please raise your hand because I'll bring a microphone to you.
Hey, Dune, thanks, by the way, for speaking. I'm over here, fellow fisherman from Bristol Bay. Would you be willing to just talk a little bit more about how kelp do how they regenerate the oceans, and just get into some more of the particulars of the benefits of kelp farming?
One of the biggest things, the first income I ever made from the sea was grappling for a herring roe on kelp when I was 11. And then during the Exxon cleanup, it was to clean up the kelp and put chemicals and soap and hot water and kill it, but clean it and throw it back in the water. So it reduced their claims. And then when the ocean started heating up, I started seeing where in a lot of different areas, the kelp was starting to disappear. And the kelp is a habitat for 100 to as many as 300 species, depending on where you're at. But the juvenile species can hide and get stronger and live off that kelp and around that kelp. And so I realized that, you know, for habitat, it was important. And also in areas where you have a lot of erosion on the beaches because of ocean rise and bigger waves, the kelp forest can actually take that wave down a notch, and that helps a little bit more. And it also, when I spent time with Brennan, the Greenway folks there, you know, they were growing mariculture species that can filter 40 to 60 gallons of water each per day. And they were living with the kelp forest and they were compatible. And I was thrilled to learn that, you know, that they were buddies because they help each other and they help the ocean. And the science is still out that, you know, basically says that kelp can sequester carbon 20 times more than live-in terrestrial forests. And so Paul Allen set out and had $1 million challenge to have somebody answer that question. And I told him that what I just told you, that the science was still out and no one knows, but I'm interested in learning. And so they gave me the award because they had received all these other, you know, people that, and folks, foundations, groups that had sent in their answers on how they could answer that. But I felt like, you know, this is something that we need to figure out and learn and just be able to, you know, experiment and grow this kelp and see what we can do. Like one outfit, they make bricks and they use volcanic ash. And they were saying that they were looking at kelp as an adhesive and an insulator, that it would help them, you know, make stronger bricks. And I said, well, I'd be interested to see how they do when it rains, like in Cordova. And then we've talked to other folks that found that if you take 2 to 3% red seaweed and add it to animal feed and feed it to cows and pigs, it reduces their emissions by 60 to 80%. Well, they're the biggest emitter of CO2s on the planet. So we should be feeding them every single day. But one of the things that I think Alaska should think about is building our own biorefineries. So we're not price takers, but we're price makers. You know, let's value add the products ourselves and sell them ourselves and keep the dollar, keep the workforce at home here. So like in the seafood industry, you know, for 150 years, I've been a price taker. When there's a big run, they drop the price. When there's a low run, they raise the price. So we're making the same amount of money. But I'm not in the mood for that anymore. I think that if we're going to get into this regenerative blue-green ocean farming, that we should be the price makers. And so we're going to do all this research. We were fortunate enough to win another grant proposal from Pew Charitable Trust. And that'll help us get a number of farms in the water to basically carry out a lot of these different tests. Because I think that the more we do, the more we'll learn and we'll figure out, you know, just what all the benefits are. But, you know, when I started looking online and I worked with Bren for about 3 years, you know, I saw the potential and that it was outside of our fishing schedule too. You know, because like we fish in the Copper River from May to October, and then I start kelping in October to May. And so it works out really well because it complements each other. And And at the same time, the one concern that I have is because it is a winter fishery, you're out there in the coldest, darkest, stormiest parts of the year, so you need good boats. And so I started a boat company and I built 8 boats in the last year and a half. But then the tariffs on aluminum is going to drive that aluminum boat business out of business. And unfortunately, again, we're going to go through some harder times before they get easier. But I'm looking at new composites because I really feel that the mariculture industry, that because the industry itself is regenerative, then so should our boats. We should not be burning fuel. Like, for example, I don't know what kind of horsepower you have on your boat, but I have 2 430 horsepower Yanmars. That's 860 horse that's burning 30 gallons an hour. Well, my kelp doesn't like it when I bring my boat around. And so I want to have electric boats. I want to figure out how to build harvest buddies, and that'll double as charge barges. So we can just plug in out there at sea and charge our batteries and be able to do our operation and make this entire value chain as regenerative as possible. So there's a lot of things, that we just have to learn and figure out how to do things differently if we're going to, really make this industry sustainable and thriving. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
How do you pronounce? And yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
All right, everyone, we are on a break now.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much to Dune again. And thanks to all of you who stuck around through the lunch period. Just a couple of quick announcements. We are going into break now, and these rooms will be divided into thirds again. So come back at 2 o'clock. Also, just a quick announcement, we AFPC will be sending out a survey in the next day or two after the conference that helps us know what worked well, what could use improvement, the next lunch you want to have at the next conference, maybe where you want to see the next conference. So make sure you take time to do that when you see it. And with that, we'll see you after the break. Thanks, everyone.